So this is week 2 of the Chef Girl Nutrition live cooking series. So I'm going live every Tuesday right here on the Chef Girl Nutrition Facebook page. And this is every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Mountain Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And each week we're cooking up a different recipe that highlights a different seasonal ingredient. So it's just a way to help, give you some inspiration for cooking, give you some inspiration, especially for using ingredients that are in season, because seasonal ingredients are more nutritious, they're more tasty, usually they're a little bit cheaper. So there's a lot of good reasons to eat seasonally. So this is what I'm trying to highlight here with this cooking series. And especially going into summer now, there's a lot of really good things that come into season now. So that's why I wanted to start this now in June, when we have all this great produce coming into season. Okay, so today we are making a pea pesto, and we're putting that pesto over pasta, and we're adding in some seasonal greens. So we're kind of highlighting two things in this recipe. We're talking about green peas, just your classic green peas, which are really in season in the spring. So they're just kind of on their way out. And if you were to see them in season at a farmer's market or something, they would be in the shell, in a pea shell, like the long green shell that you're used to seeing. And then you pop the peas out of the shell. So that's how you would get them fresh. But what's great about this recipe is we can make it even when peas aren't in season, because we can use frozen peas, and that's what I'm using. So we have just a cup of peas. These were frozen. I just defrosted them quickly by running them under some cold water in a strainer. You could also just zap them in the microwave for like a minute, but you want them to cool down before you're making a pesto. So that's the only thing there. If you did buy them fresh, you would pop them out of the pods, and then you can just toss them in boiling water for like a minute or two, just to lightly blanch them so that they're more tender, so they're not just raw peas that you're throwing into the pesto. And then we're tossing in some greens. We're tossing greens into the pasta as well. So most greens right now are in season, most different kinds of salad greens, spinach, arugula, Swiss chard, which is what I'm using. So that's these guys. But you can really use any greens that you like for this recipe. You can use already like a bag of mixed greens or something too, so you don't have to go and chop them up if you don't want to. You can buy pre-chopped or bagged greens as well. And you can use any pasta for this recipe too. So I'll be using, I'm just using a whole grain spaghetti. I like spaghetti with pesto. But you can use any pasta that you like. We're using a half a pound of pasta, so that's half a package. Most pastas come in a 1 pound package, so it's just half of the bag or the box. So that's what we're going to be using. So let's pull you a little closer here. Okay, so I already have my water boiling, because I am in Colorado, and I heard before I moved here that at higher altitudes, it takes a long time for water to boil, and I have found that to be quite true. So I got my water boiling ahead of time so that we weren't waiting an hour for my water to boil. So I'll just go over a few of the things that you need if you're cooking along with me, and you hopefully got the recipe ahead of time so you have all your ingredients. For our pesto, we have a cup of peas. We have juice from half of a lemon. We have some roasted pine nuts, and you don't have to use pine nuts. Pine nuts can be more expensive than other nuts and harder to find, so you can use really any walnuts, pecans, almonds, and I do just recommend roasting them first because you get more flavor that way. We have a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, half a cup of fresh basil. So like last week's recipe, we were using fresh herbs, which are also in season in the summer. So a lot of these recipes that I'm going to be doing throughout the cooking series will highlight fresh herbs too, just because they're all really delicious right now. So we have the half a cup of fresh basil, a 1/4 cup of olive oil, and some salt and pepper. So that's all you need for the pesto and a food processor. You could also use a high-powered blender, like a Vitamix or some good high-powered blender. That will work fine as well. This pesto recipe is going to make 1 cup of pesto, and it works perfectly with a 1/2 pound of pasta. If you wanted to make the full package of pasta, maybe if you're cooking for 4 people, for a full family, you could just double the pesto recipe and use the whole package of pasta. Easy enough. Okay, so I'm going to add my pasta. Okay, and we want to add, whenever we're cooking pasta, we want to season the water so that the pasta itself gets flavor. So we want a nice hefty palm full of salt. You want the water to like taste salty. Okay, so we'll add that in. Give the salt a quick stir around. Okay, and so with something like spaghetti, the noodles can be too long to fit in the pot, right? But once they get cooking, you can kind of, push them down into the pot so that they fit in there. You could always also break them in half. Okay. Now whenever I'm using any sort of spaghetti or linguine, any sort of stringy long pasta, I like to use tongs when mixing rather than just like a spoon, because it helps to keep the spaghetti separated as you're mixing. So I'm just letting this kind of soften enough that I can fit it all in the pan. So at this point, if anybody's cooking along with me, want to get your pasta going. Most pastas will take somewhere around like 8 minutes or so to get to that al dente texture where they still have a little bit of bite to it. We don't want mushy pasta. But again, depending on, all pasta will cook at a little bit different times, so just look on your package if you're not sure how long to let it cook for. Okay, so all my spaghetti fit in there. You can usually leave the lid off when cooking pasta, but again, my water has issues boiling, so I keep the lid like half on to help keep it boiling. Okay. All right, let's see. If anybody new is popping in at any point, just say hi, tell me you're here. All right. So I'm gonna pull you closer here, and now we're gonna make the pesto. So I'm using a food processor. Everything that's here is just going right into the food processor. So peas are sweet, right? So they actually make like a surprisingly sweet pesto, and they also make it creamier. Plus, something most people don't know about peas, what sometimes is surprising, is that peas actually contain a lot of protein. So you might see pea protein, like even as protein powders, or there's like a whole line of dairy-free milk that's really like made out of pea protein. So peas are being used now for being a plant-based source of protein. So this whole cup of peas actually has 8 grams of protein in it. So by adding peas into the pesto, we're actually amping up the protein content of it also. So then by adding that pesto onto the pasta creates a more, satisfying meal where you don't even necessarily need to add other, like salmon or shrimp or chicken into the pasta. You certainly can, but you don't really need to. By making a pea pesto, it actually makes for a really great plant-based meal. So that's just something about peas. And okay, so we have a cup of peas in there. I'm adding in 1/2 cup of fresh basil. I like to like pack it in there, because they're fresh leaves. So if you do loosely packed, you're gonna get a lot less than if you tightly pack them. So I like to do a tightly packed half a cup. You could also put fresh mint in this pesto. That would also be really good. Mint and peas go very well together. Okay, we have a 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan cheese. Oh, I know what I forgot, garlic. Okay, we also want a clove of garlic in this pesto. And you can do, depending on how much, just getting the skin off here, you know, depending on your preference for garlic, you could add another clove in there, or just, I like to just put one kind of fat clove in. We have the juice of half of a large lemon, so it's about, you know, like 1.5 tablespoons or so. Pour that in. And 2 tablespoons of roasted pine nuts, or again, whatever nuts you're using. You could also use pumpkin seeds. I have a recipe for pumpkin seed pesto. It works out really well. So you could also use seeds if you have a nut allergy. Okay, and we're gonna add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So I start with a 1/4 teaspoon, and I usually end up adding more at the end, another pinch or so at the end. And just a few grinds of black pepper. I don't ever really measure when I'm using freshly ground black pepper because it's hard to measure it. Just go with it. If you like pepper, add more. If you don't add so much. Okay, so the only ingredient for the pesto that we're not adding right into the food processor is the olive oil. So we're going to slowly drizzle the olive oil in as we start pulsing on the food processor. So that helps to really emulsify everything together by slowly drizzling the olive oil in rather than adding the whole thing in at once. So if you're using a food processor, just take the little top piece out. I'm just going to take this whole top piece out. And same thing if you're using a blender, you just take that little top part off the top of the blender, and we'll just drizzle it in. Before I do that, I'm just going to give my pasta a little stir. And also, if you're using any sort of whole grain pasta, it'll take a little bit longer to cook than white pasta, just because it's hardier. The whole wheat flour is hardier. So just like I said, just pay attention to whatever the package says. Okay, so it's gonna get loud for a second. So we're gonna just pulse it. So I'm just hitting the pulse button, and I'm gonna just drizzle the olive oil in slowly as I pulse it. And you'll always want to stop like halfway through because it will splatter a bit, so we want to try to scrape it down from the sides, and in this case from the lid. This also makes like a super bright green pesto, so it is really pretty on the pasta. Alrighty. Get everything. Okay. and we'll pulse again. That should be good. Okay, so you can see, just drop this on my computer. It's nice and green, it's nice and creamy. Yeah. All right, so I always just pull out the blade, scrape it off the blade, because stuff will kind of get stuck under there too. So you want to get the blade out. Unplug the food processor so you don't hurt yourself. And set this aside here. All right. And just give it a little mix. Okay, so you can see it's nice and creamy, nice and green. So I'm all about to, I just was writing about this today. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this cooking series also, like I said, is to highlight different seasonal ingredients, but also to show you different ways to use them that maybe you don't typically use them. So like, I'm not a super big fan of just green peas, you know, by the way that they are. I don't really love the texture of them. But as a pesto, I'm still getting all of the great nutrient benefits of peas, but I'm transforming it completely into a pesto. So that's also what I'm, you know, what the recipes that I'm using in this live cooking series will kind of showcase different ways to use these vegetables and fruits. Last we used strawberries, and I showed you how to you know, cook those up in a different way rather than just eating them as is, even though they're delicious as is. There's always different ways that we can eat them so that we don't get bored with eating the same things too, because it can get boring if you're always kind of eating, you know, your favorite fruits and veggies, but you're not really getting any variety in, you know, the types of fruits and veggies or the way that you're preparing them. So learning some different ways to kind of transform these ingredients into something different can help you, you know, find some new excitement in cooking and in eating. All right, so that pesto is done. So I'm just gonna check the spaghetti again. So peas are technically a legume. So that's the same family as beans and lentils, which also are, you know, they all have a higher protein content. So we typically talk about peas as a vegetable. And like, they are, you know, a vegetable, but they're technically in the legume family. So that also means, like lentils and beans, they also have more carbohydrate than non-starchy vegetables like lettuce and peppers and, you know, every kind of other vegetable that you can think of, broccoli, all of that kind of stuff. So it has a lot of fiber. Peas have a lot of fiber in them. They're filled with, you know, vitamins and minerals like all other kinds of vegetables and legumes. So a lot of antioxidant properties. And like I said, they're much higher in protein than some other, you know, typical vegetables that we have in our diets. Okay, I'm gonna just grab one of these noodles. I don't think it's done, but almost. Okay. I'm gonna have another minute or two. So let's look. Oh, you know what? I want to just taste this to see if it needs more salt than last time. It definitely needed more salt. Let's get a little spoon. So yeah, so always, like I said, we start with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt in the pesto and a few sprinkles of black pepper, but always taste so that you can adjust the seasonings to your liking. So that's why I always, like, when I'm, you know, when you have a recipe, it'll, like, I'll always write it as what, the minimum amount of seasoning that you want to use. And then you can always add more seasoning. Even if it's something like crushed red pepper, if you like something spicier, you add more pepper. So you don't need to always follow recipes exactly as written. You want to get used to understanding what kinds of flavors you like, and what's good for your palate. If you like things a little bit saltier, if you like things a little bit more peppery, if whatever it is, you can always adjust seasonings. That's delicious. It's like super, it's like sweet, it's like a very interesting hint of sweetness, but it's also super bright from the basil and the lemon juice. It's very summery. You could even do this like for a summer barbecue. You can do this as like a cold pasta salad, like a cold pesto pasta salad. That would also be really good. All right, I'm adding just another little pinch of salt. If you ever can't kind of like detect all of the flavors in the pesto, like I'm not like totally getting the lemon, that's why I'm adding more salt. The salt will actually help to bring out all the other flavors. Okay. And like I said before, we want to salt things as we cook. So each, kind of step of the recipe, we want to add salt so that everything is kind of equally seasoned. If you just season something with salt at the very end of cooking, it's going to taste salty. It's not, because then the food doesn't have a chance to like absorb that salty flavor, so it's just going to taste salty. So you want to really add salt throughout, all the different steps of cooking. Okay, so pesto set aside. And our last ingredient, while I wait for the pasta to finish cooking up, is our greens. So, like I said, I'm using Swiss chard. I'm actually using rainbow chard. So that's, if you ever see it, it's different colored stems, and then you even get some different colored leaves. So Swiss chard is in season right now, so it's really fresh. So I'm just removing the leaf from the rib of the chard here. All right, we don't want this rib part. We just want the leaf. And this just needs a rough chop. So I already have a bunch of it chopped up here. So I'm just going to chop up the rest, but I just wanted to show you what I was using. But again, you can use whatever kinds of greens you like. And again, this is the recipe is written for 3 cups of greens. So that's what you get that's about what you get out of a head of some type of green. So out of a head of like the Swiss chard was one bunch, or like 1 bunch of kale. Otherwise, if you're doing, like spinach or something else from a package, you just want 3 cups of it chopped. Okay. So that's good for our greens. So those are just going to wait until we're ready for them. All right. So pasta should be done at this point. Double check here. Open it up. Pasta's done. So what we're going to do, move the greens over. Okay. So we're actually going to, now there's a few ways that you can really assemble this. I'm doing it this way. Overcook. I chose to do it this way, as is written in the recipe, because it saves you from using another couple of dishes. So this way we don't have to use a colander, and we don't have to use a second pot or pan. So I'm just removing the pasta with tongs from the water rather than draining it in a colander. And we're going to use the same pot to heat up the pesto and mix it up with the pasta. Okay, and we don't want to drain our water. Keep your water in the pot. We're going to reserve a half a cup of the starchy pasta water, and we're going to use that to thin out the pesto to make it more of an actual sauce. Okay, and I don't think I mentioned this in the recipe, but by putting the pasta, you can't even see. So I just put the pasta into a large serving dish here, and because we're not going to touch it for a minute, I'm just going to put a little drizzle of olive oil over it, and that will just help the noodles from getting all stuck together while they sit here. And that's just a tip in general. If you're cooking pasta and you're setting it aside before you're ready to use it, you can drizzle some olive oil on top so that the noodles don't get all stuck together. Okay, so we want to reserve. It doesn't need to be a half a cup exactly. We just want to reserve some of the starchy pasta water. Set that aside, and then spaghetti in there. And then what we're going to do is I have the heat just on low now. And to cook up these greens really quickly, we're just going to give them a really quick blanch in the hot tub. So just toss them in. They won't sink. They'll pretty much just stay at the surface. And something, delicate greens like the Swiss chard or spinach really only need to be in the water for like 15 to 30 seconds. It's just to get them, slightly wilted so that it's not just raw greens. Something a little bit heartier like kale might need, like up to a minute or two to really soften up. So this is just, I have them just sitting in the water, and then I'm using a spider strainer, or you can use like just a slotted spoon, and that's it. And I'm just scooping them out, and I'm going to add them right into the pasta. And it's okay that it's wet because we want the pasta water anyway to help when we add the pesto to the pasta, so you don't need to like drain the greens once they come out of the water. It's okay that they're wet. And that's it. So it's just a super quick way to we're just quickly blanching the greens. And by doing a quick blanch like this, we're also preserving more of the nutrients in the greens. I'm just gonna, now we want to drain the water. So the more that we cook a vegetable, the more the nutrients kind of get depleted, right? When they're raw, they're at their highest nutrient content generally, and the longer we cook them, the more the nutrients can kind of leach out a little bit. So anywhere that we can kind of cut down the cooking time also helps to really preserve those nutrients. So by just quickly blanching these greens, we're keeping all those nutrients in. And speaking of those, we're also highlighting greens as one of our seasonal ingredients. So greens are, the darker the green, the more nutrients they have. So going maybe down the line from like iceberg lettuce, which is essentially water, crunchy water, delicious, but not very high in nutrients. Then we have like romaine lettuce, and then as we get into things like spinach, Swiss chard, and kale and things like that that are much darker green, those are going to have the most nutrient content, and they're full of fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin K. They also are full of calcium. They're like dark leafy greens are actually a good source of plant-based calcium. So for somebody who doesn't eat any dairy and needs to get their calcium from plant foods, can get those from dark leafy greens. They're also really high in vitamin C, and we can improve the absorption of vitamin C with, I'm saying this backwards. The dark leafy greens have a lot of iron content, and we can improve the iron absorption. As I'm talking, I'm just going to add the pesto into this pot here. So the iron that's in plant sources is less absorbable than the iron that's in animal sources like red meat. So we can improve the absorption of that iron by adding vitamin C to those foods. So doing something like squeezing some lemon juice onto dark leafy greens will improve the iron absorption from those greens. So that's just like a good, if you're having like a salad with a base of dark leafy greens, having like a lemon juice kind of vinaigrette on top is really good. And they just go well together anyway. So, so this too, like our pesto has lemon juice in it. And you could even add another squeeze of lemon juice on top at the end. Okay, so I'm just putting the heat on low. We just are adding the pesto, and we're going to start with like 1/3 cup of the starchy water that you reserved. So that's just to help thin out the pesto so that it's actually a sauce, so that it actually coats the pasta like a sauce. Gosh, it smells so good. Give me a little holler in the comments that you're still with me. Tell me what you're thinking about the pea pesto. And I'll just show you what this is looking like. Whoops. Let's put this down a little bit and I'll show you. Okay, so it's just, now we're getting it to be a little more sauce-like. Okay. All right, and then we're adding in our noodles and greens. We're just gonna slide all of that right into the pot. Okay, so this is how we're using the same serving dish that we're going to use. We're using the same pot that we use for the pasta. So really trying to save you some dish cleaning. And again, I'm using tongs for this. If you're using any sort of noodles, I recommend using tongs. It makes it much easier to stir. And that's it. This is the whole dish. And like I said, you don't really need to add any, this is a really good just plant-based dish on its own, but you certainly could add some, grilled salmon, some shrimp, some chicken, whatever you would like into this. And then you can just add more of the starchy pasta water as needed to help thin out the sauce even more, until it's kind of at your desired consistency and that the pasta is well coated. See? Okay. If you're here with me live, give me a thumbs up. Give me a looks delicious. Let me know if you're going to try the pesto pasta. Okay, so that's it. Heat is off. I didn't really need any more of the starchy water. And what would also be really good in this is tomatoes are also coming into season now for summer. So throwing in like some roasted cherry tomatoes in here would be really, really good. Tomatoes and pesto are a classic combo. All right, so just plating up the pasta right back into the same serving dish. I didn't add any red pepper flakes to this, but you could definitely add some red pepper flakes. That would be really good. All right, just dump the rest of this out. Okay. All right, so that is our pesto pasta, our pea pesto pasta with seasonal greens. And then what I like to do is garnish this with some more of the roasted pine nuts. Having a little, it just adds texture to, you know, what's otherwise a very soft textured dish. So you can add some toasted pine nuts on top. You can add some a little extra Parmesan cheese or some more fresh basil leaves. And voila, that's it. So that is our recipe for week 2 of the live cooking series, our pea pesto pasta with seasonal greens. Delicious. It smells delicious. So if you make this recipe, let me know how it turns out. I'd love if you could send me pictures if you make the recipe. If you're making it at home and you're watching this video or you have any questions at all, you can always reach out and ask me any questions that you have. And I would love to hear from you going forward with the live cooking series. If there's any, you know, specific ingredients that you want to see me use, anything that's unfamiliar to you that you'd like to see me use, let me know. You can always just send me a message on Facebook, shoot me an email. I would love to hear from you. All right, guys. Bye.